When reassembling the electrical components, I decided to ignore the state of the headlight unit, not least due to the various attachments being held on with plastic clips that have "Break Me" written all over them. But I eventually got fed up with looking at the ring of rust around the rim, so I decided to have a go at pulling it apart. It is held to the mounting brackets via 3 ball-ended posts, 2 of which were adjustable. Popping the ball ends out the plastic clips was simple enough. The clips have a simple mechanism to hold them in the brackets on the headlight unit, and of course one of them behaved as expected and broke, and another cracked but didn't come apart. With hindsight, applying some heat may have helped. I have already removed most of the flaking rust by this stage, but as well as the surface rust, it has also spread below the coating and is showing through. It would appear that the coating is some form of ceramic, no doubt due to the heat that the original incandescent bulb would have been giving off. To properly restore this, it really needs to be stripped and recoated, both on the inside and the outside, but that is way beyond my capabilities, so I'll go with a simple fix, which should give a few more years' use. Incidentally, these headlights were used on Fiats and can be bought used online from Europe, although I couldn't find any new or refurbed units. Because I've replaced the original light bulb with an LED version, I'm expecting heat to be much less of a concern. So after removing as much of the rust as is practical, I mask over the glass and the bulb holes and give the back a good coating of Hamrite direct to rust paint. Getting the rubber boot that fits over the rear of the headlight bulb back in position was a challenge, which I eventually managed with some help from my heat gun. Although not an exact match to the original parts, I was able to find these replacement clips on eBay. The socket end does appear to be a little tight, but the other end fits quite nicely into the brackets on the headlight unit, so that's that problem solved. One more little job before fitting the assembly back on the bike. I have given the pilot light rubber my usual treatment with alcohol and wintergreens fluid to soften it, so I refit it and swap out the bulb for an LED item. The whole assembly is secured to the headlight bracket via 3 M5 studs, and I of course use stainless nylock nuts. A quick test shows that all is working and that I no longer have that difference in colour between the pilot and the headlight. Another part that I've been putting off dealing with is the exhaust header. It is very tatty with patchy paintwork and multiple areas of rust. It's also showing damage on both sides on the bends from the downward sections to the horizontal sections, indicative of the bike being dropped multiple times. On this side it also appears to have been crudely welded. I did consider trying to build up both sides with a MIG, but my welding skills are very limited and I'd probably do more damage. To remove the old paint and rust, I opt for some therapeutic work with an angle grinder and wire wheel. With the paint and the rust removed, I give it a good thick coating with this high temperature matte black paint. The downside with any of these high temperature paints is that until they're cured with some heat, they are far from durable. And despite my best efforts, I do end up picking up a few scratches on the balance pipe when I refit it to the bike, but nothing that I can't touch up. Not surprisingly, it looks much better on the bike, although these pictures are pre-engine running, so the paint is not yet cured. After engine running, there is some discoloration, which is annoying. This may come off with some alcohol, but I'll run the engine a few more times before giving that a go. Like the headlight unit, this is not a proper fix, but should be good enough to make the bike look half decent for a few more years. Another little job that's been on the back burner from way back is securing the front wheel bearings. As we can see, they drop out quite easily. There is some evidence of the bearings having rotated in situ, but that's minor and likely to have been as a result of me pushing the bike around over the past few years. The bearing faces were protected when I had the wheels blasted and powder coated, so why the loose fit, I don't know. Whatever the cause, they can't be left like this, so I used some Loctite 638 to hold them in place. Apparently this stuff can deal with gaps up to 1/4 mil, although mine aren't anywhere near that bad. And unlike 648, it doesn't need heat to break the bond, so it shouldn't be creating a bigger problem for the future. Back in part 2 I mentioned the Sump Extender and my uncertainty as to whether this was a standard part, and Splodge5714, now there's a musical reference, left a comment advising that it was a standard part on the Mark III. Before dropping the actual sump off, I noticed that there is evidence of the gasket leaking, but that's not a problem as I will be fitting a new one. I drain the oil after first warming the engine. This is not the oil I first used after rebuilding the engine, and we can see that it's still quite clean, but it's been in there for a while now, probably 3 to 4 years, so it won't hurt to replace it along with fitting a new filter. There are 14 bolts around the perimeter of the sump, and as I remove them I remember that the ones I used are quite short, and also notice that they're not very tight, which explains the oil leak. A good reminder about the pitfalls of temporary workarounds. As well as the perimeter bolts, there are another 4 that align to the oil passageways. None of these bolts will fit with the extender, so will need replacing. With the sump off, I drain the rest of the oil and we can see there is a little sludge, but no evidence of silver, and the magnet on the sump plug is also clean. On the bench I removed the old filter, which as we can see comes off quite easily. A bit too easily really. When fitting the new filter I do it as tight as I can by hand. Having checked the various forums, there are not surprisingly multiple opinions on whether or not it should be torqued. Apparently it's quite common for some to fit a hose clamp to hold it in place. I go with hand tight and no clamp. Old habits die hard, and I give the gaskets a smear of grease, hopefully making it easier to remove them later. With no centre stand or for that matter a bike lift, refitting the sump with the extender back onto the bike is an awkward job. I first fit a few bolts to loosely hold it in situ, and I then continue with the rest, adding alu-slip to the threads. For 6mm bolts on the Guzzi I work to a torque of 10 Newton meters. It is generally advised that torque settings be reduced when using any anti-seize, but Modelslip's data sheet shows that 10 Newton meters is off the bottom of their scale, and I strongly suspect that having all bolts torqued to the same value will be more important than the absolute value. The sump plug gets a new crush washer before being refitted. The Le Mans 3 takes 3 litres of oil, and I used this Silclean 10W40 semi-synthetic when I rebuilt the engine, so I'll continue with it for now, although another common choice would appear to be 20W50. The filler is tucked away under the left cylinder, so a funnel and hose are needed to fill it. For now I put in about 2.8 litres, but the engine should be warm and checking the level, so that'll have to wait till the next time I have it running. So what next? Paintwork aside, I'm actually close to having the bike up and running and roadworthy, and in fact the paint is not a blocker to achieving that. The main thing that needs to be done is to finish off the brakes by adding some fluid and then bleeding them, although I'm not looking forward to doing that on the linked side. But, and there's always a but, something I'm not too sure about is the forks. As I've been pulling the bike in, out and around my workshop, the forks don't feel particularly good and appear to be both quite sticky but also very bouncy. Given that I stripped and rebuilt these 7 years ago, I think it's worth another look. Getting them off the bike is a royal pain in the ass, but it will be a lot easier now than it will be once I've got the brakes completed. Thanks for watching.